body found in the street early one morning. A trail of bloody evidence leads to 3 more bodies in a house. A paramilitary cult is responsible. This week, the real-life nightmare on Elm Street. Next. The Central Valley of California is a flat, elongated stretch of land about 450 miles long that runs from northeast to southeast down the center of the state. Often called the breadbasket of the world, it's thought to be mostly farms and agriculture, but there are many towns and cities here that are home to nearly 7 million people. Not a lot of money in these parts. Drug use is rampant and the homicide rate is off the charts. Here are some of their stories. This is Murder in the Central Valley. It's 1990 in the small farming community of Salida, just outside Modesto. Nothing out of the ordinary happens here. That's why a messy tract of land with some trailers and a small house in the back didn't get much attention. Neighbors called it the camp, and they were frightened by the residents. A lot of crazy shit was going on within its parameters. A group of degenerates led by a twisted leader named Gerald Cruz. Before we get to that, let's talk about how the camp came to be. Gerald Dean Cruz was born in 1962. To say his childhood was complicated would be an understatement. Before he was born, his father left his mother and moved to Mexico. So when she gave birth to Gerald, she put her friend's last name on the birth certificate, Cox. So that was his legal last name, but he only knew it to be Cruz. Until he was in school and he was called Cox in roll call. When he was just 2, his real dad came back from Mexico and was surprised he had a son. Gerald had older siblings, but he thought they were cousins, as they called their mom Auntie, so her husband wouldn't know that she had so many kids. When he was 14, someone told him that his half-sister Hope was actually his mom, and Jimmy Cox was his real father, but this is believed not to be true. Cruz's mother used to beat him with switches, coat hangers, ropes, cords, and anything else she could find. She was violent and sadistic. She convinced him he had special powers. Once, their cat ate her canary. She took a knife and cut its stomach open to look for the bird. The neighbor's dog kept getting into their yard. She caught the dog and cut its hind legs off with an axe so it couldn't come back. If witnessing all this isn't a recipe to create a troubled adult. He also had several head injuries. Once, as an infant, one of his half-sisters dropped him and he hit his head on the concrete. They couldn't afford to take him to the doctor. He cried, had a bump on his head, and was uncomfortable the rest of the day. He wouldn't take a bottle for a few days, but then started to eat again, and all was back to normal. Also, when he was 4, he went through a car windshield when the driver stopped short. He was stunned for a while, but seemed okay the next day. And in high school, he was hit in the head with a rubber mallet. Cruz rarely completed a full year in elementary school. His family traveled and he neglected assignments to be performed while he was away. He had no friends until the 4th grade. Gerald was bullied in high school about his hair, his clothes, and the fact he didn't know his father. So in his sophomore year, he dropped out and never looked back. In 1987, Gerald met the love of his life, Jennifer. He was 25 and she was just 16. They started a family together. In 1989, Jennifer was pregnant with their 3rd child when they moved into a studio apartment at the back of the camp, a large tract of land on Finney Road. Cruz often hung out with weak, vulnerable, and homeless people. This was so he could control and manipulate them. It's these type of people he let move into the camp. 2 men, James Beck and Ricky Vera, moved into a large trailer that was directly in front of the Cruz residence. Missy Evans lived in a smaller trailer parked behind Beck and Vera. At some point, a man named Jason Lamar started dating Michelle and would stay in her trailer. Frequently around the same time, Ricky Vera's childhood friend, a man named Stephen Perkins, moved in. Another man named Ron Willie, who was friends with Cruz and Beck, moves in and becomes mixed up with the cult as well. January 1990, a 51-year-old man named Franklin Raper moved his trailer to the camp. Even though Raper was part of the cult, he was at odds with the other men. As mentioned before, the people at the camp were a paramilitary cult. Gerald Cruz was their leader and Beck was his right-hand man. Their ideology was based on Gerald's beliefs. It was all over the board. One day they would be a satanic cult. The next they would be talking about God. Then white supremacy. Next the military. Then witchcraft. Because of the manic nature of the group, they went by lots of names. Children of Satan. Children of the night. False prophets of revelations. Judge and jury of people's fate. The camp cults. But mainly they went by the order of the lion. Some people called it a cult of personality. The brainwashed outcasts did whatever their leader told them. Most days they would wear camouflage. During their rituals, they would wear white gowns, almost like Klansmen. Gerald was abusive to everyone around him. He would torture his eldest daughter and beat Jennifer. Cruz hit their infant daughter on her legs or bottom with a fly swatter or a ruler. When she was less than 6 months old, Cruz punished her by placing her in a dark room and allowing Jennifer to feed, hold, or change her only every 6 hours. When Jennifer objected to this treatment, Cruz beat her. When their daughter was less than a year old, Cruz would suspend her in a halter in the middle of a device he called the rack, and attach to her legs mason jars filled with water. He would then make her cry so that her legs would go up and down. He said he wanted to make her stronger. Cruz also gave their daughter what he called clappings, in which he would slap the back or side of her head with his open hand. Once, he left bruising inside of her ears. When she was learning to walk, Cruz found it humorous to ask her if she wanted a clapping, and watch her respond by falling to the ground and hiding her head between her hands. Gerald had a little game he would play. He would make his followers stand perfectly still, and he would punch them in the stomach as hard as he could. Cruz said to stand still and take it. Cruz performed a similar ritual about 50 times against Perkins. On several occasions and without warning, he used a scorpion stun gun on Vieira. Vieira would scream and jump. Cruz used the stun gun on Jennifer twice. On one occasion, he placed a rifle in Jennifer's mouth and asked, "Are you going to get your shit together or are you going to die?" On January 6, 1990, when Jennifer was about 2 months pregnant, Gerald pushed her to the ground. He then kicked her in the stomach and between her legs, causing bleeding. Jennifer fled barefoot and without a jacket to a woman's shelter for 4 days. Cruz asked Jennifer to return and was kind to her, so she moved back in with him. During their relationship, Cruz struck Jennifer about 100 times with a cane or other object. Whenever Cruz thought Jennifer had, quote, gotten out of line or the couple fought, Cruz would punish her, and some of the punishments were sadistic for her and the rest of the crew. Once, Perkins was installing vinyl and hardwood flooring and accidentally cut an orange extension cord with an electric saw. His punishment was severe. Gerald took the exposed wires and taped them around Steven's toes. He plugged the other end into an outlet that was controlled by a light switch. While Perkins was working in the living room, Gerald would flip the switch on, giving Steven a shock. His foot was burnt and infected by the shock treatment he received. He would lay on the floor and moan in pain. He eventually ended up being hospitalized. He told everyone he had been in a motorcycle accident. Cruz had strange ways of keeping his followers in line. He had a wooden wheel with different forms of punishment written on it. They would throw it in the air, catch it, and where their thumb landed was the punishment they would receive. He made the members write all their thoughts in a journal. This was so he could get into their heads. Franklin Raper was at odds with all the men at the camp. They would fight all the time. Raper was doing and selling drugs out of his trailer. Cruz complained that he would leave needles all around that his children could get a hold of. One night, LaMarche accused Raper of stealing his gun and the two men got into a physical altercation. Gerald finally had enough and showed Franklin the door, but he refused to leave. So one day when he went out, they moved his trailer off the property. Later they pushed his vehicle across the street and lit it on fire. Raper was pissed and threatened that he was going to get his biker buddies to kill Cruz. Finally, Franklin moved to a house on Elm Street. Michelle Evans' sister lived there. On May 18, 1990, Gerald and Cruz went to the Elm Street house where Raper was staying to move some furniture out. Cruz brought a 12-pack of beer and shared it with everyone as a peace offering. Raper and LaMarche got into an argument which became a fist fight. Soon they were all wrestling. The crew finally left. This was when Cruz decided that Raper had to die. A plan was made. May 20th, Gerald told Evans to call her sister, who lived with Raper, and tell her to stay away from home that evening. He also had her draw a floor plan of the house. The crew had a barbecue that evening, playing loud heavy metal music and swinging bats and knives around to get amped up for the killings. Shortly after midnight, May 21st, armed with a gun, knives, bats and batons, Cruz, Beck, Vera, LaMarche, Evans and Ronald Willie, another cult member, went to the house to take care of business. Gerald told Michelle to go into the house and try to get everybody to the front room to make it easier to kill them. Her sister lives there, so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for her to be there. In the house on Elm Street was 51-year-old Franklin Raper, 23-year-old Darlene Paris, 25-year-old Richard Ritchie, 35-year-old Dennis Colwell, and 22-year-old Donna Alvarez. Evans and LaMarche are dropped off in front of the house. Cruz parks the car up the street. Michelle goes in and tries to lure everyone to the front of the house. She sees the perimeter being surrounded by the armed group. Suddenly they poured in from all the windows and doors on every side. Bats and batons were flying as Donna Alvarez escaped to the garage and hid under some laundry. She eventually pushed up the door and ran to a neighbor's house. Back inside, Cruz was hitting Raper in the head with a baton. Vieira was trying to pull Paris, who was crying, out from under a kitchen table. At the same time, Beck grabbed Colwell and stabbed him in the stomach. Darlene was screaming and crying. Cruz told Vera to shut her up. He grabbed her by the hair, pulled her head back and started to saw her neck with a knife. She was nearly decapitated. Outside, Willie was on Ritchie in the street. He stabbed him. Cruz came out, beat him in the head and cut his throat. After everyone was dead, the crew got back into the car and went back to the camp. There were several neighbors that witnessed the murder outside and directed the sheriffs where to go. They went right to the camp. Cruz was there and taken into custody. They put a bee on the lookout for Ricky Vieira and Jason LaMarche. Ricky was quickly picked up, but LaMarche was more elusive. He ended up hitching a ride with a female friend. The two went to Oregon. On the way, he confessed to the crime. She made it seem like it was no big deal. After she dropped him off, she immediately called the authorities. He was arrested and brought back to Stanislaus County to face his crime. In the end, Gerald Cruz, James Beck and Ricky Vieira got the death penalty and are sitting on death row. Jason LaMarche and Ronald Willie were both sentenced to 64 years to life. Michelle Evans entered a plea agreement. She would plead guilty, and in exchange for her truthful testimony at trial against Beck, Cruz, LaMarche, and Willie, she received 6 months in jail with 6 months already served. Every few years there's an appeal from the Order of the Lion members claiming they were brainwashed into committing murder. All have been denied. Today, over 30 years later, the area where the camp was located, Finney Road, has been bulldozed and turned into a large housing development. That's this week's episode of Murder in the Central Valley. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.